Good morning and welcome back to our Ministry Under Fire 2020. As you might know, I'm Netta Higuera and I'm a attorney on the Advocates for Faith and Freedom side. And I'm here with Jen Bursch, who's a partner with Tyler and Bursch. And today we are discussing the new landscape of unemployment and FMLA, which is Family Medical Leave Act, and we'll touch on the CARES Act as well. And as you know, last week we talked about reopening plans and COVID-19 liability. If you weren't able to watch that, we recommend you go back and check that out. It's up on our YouTube page. And next week we'll be talking about the pros and cons of state and federal funds for both private school and churches. So what are the implications of accepting some of this funding and things like that? So we look forward to having you next week as well. And so this week, as I said, we're talking about unemployment, the pandemic programs, and Family Medical Leave Act. And Jen is going to give us a lot of helpful information, especially with things constantly changing. So we'll give you the latest news and updates. And how about we start? Can you explain to us a little bit about the difference between state programs and federal programs and how those interplay?
Yeah, so we're talking a lot about federal unemployment lately because I think most people know at this point that the federal government gave $600 to add a week that could be added on to state unemployment. So a lot of focus on federal, which is unusual in this area of law, but typically you just apply with the state. So that's a question I've been getting a lot from churches is how do people apply to the federal government? You don't. Everything from the federal government is sent to the state. You always apply through the state. And if you're able to get unemployment through the state, you'll be able to access that federal unemployment as well. So the systems really are meant to work together, but as a church or as a nonprofit, you would be working with the state.
Okay, so if I was a church employee and unfortunately they had to lay me off, I would apply through the state. I don't have to do anything on the federal level?
That's correct, yeah.
Okay.
But I wouldn't apply right now because Newsom just suspended them.
Yes, tell me about the reset and why I can't apply right now. What can I do? When can I apply?
Yeah, Newsom just came out on Monday and said that the system is bogged down and that Cal Matters came out and said that there's 1.6 million claims that have not been processed in California. So in order to try to get caught up, Newsom came out and said that we're going to suspend unemployment claims for 2 weeks. So you can't even submit a claim right now, which is really unusual. But pretty soon we'll be able to keep going. And that's this slide that's showing right now kind of walks through that, the 1.6 million of unresolved. And they're saying that it'll be until January until that's completely, that backlog is handled and we've gotten rid of it. So it's going to be a long time. But right now they're saying that to just contact the state and they'll take your information. And in 2 weeks, the state will contact you back, hopefully, and allow you to submit a claim. I wonder how that will go because they're still going to be backlogged.
Yes, right.
Yeah. And now they're going to have all these names of people that they didn't even take claims from.
And they have to contact them and start the new claims. Oh, man. No wonder we don't want the government involved in things like healthcare and things like that because, I mean, things like this happen. And so if I have to wait to file unemployment, am I going to get reimbursed for these 2 weeks?
Yes, you should be able to get retroactive. So the way unemployment always works is whenever you apply, you're able to get it from that point if you're approved later on.
And October 5th is when you can apply again.
That's correct.
Okay. And tell us a little bit more about this supplemental aid that you were talking about that comes from the federal government.
Yeah, so at first the federal government was giving $600 a week if you were getting any state unemployment. That's changed a little bit. Congress had a huge fight. They couldn't ever get anything passed to extend it, and that ended, I believe it was July 31st. So that's stopped. But what President Trump did is he issued an executive order giving $300 a week extra if you get $100 from the state. So there's like a floor now. If you're not getting $100 of an unemployment from the state, let's say that for whatever reason you only qualified for, I don't know, $80, then you wouldn't qualify for the extra 300 from the feds. But the federal government did approve the state's application for that money, and the state announced last week that they were going to start sending $900 checks because it was retroactive to the week of August 1st.
Okay, and how long does that last? Is that indefinite?
Right now, it's just for the 3 weeks, and we don't know if Trump's going to continue that or what's going to happen at this point.
And my understanding is Congress is trying to work something out with the president and negotiating. So, and that also involves whether we'll be receiving a second stimulus check. That's all connected.
Yep.
Okay.
That is all. Really, that's just extending the CARES Act and all of those that were passed very early on in the pandemic. This is getting pretty far into politics, but as we all know, it seems like the closer you get to the election, the less likely that you're going to have movement on that stuff. We're really seeing deadlocks, and now everybody's focused on the Supreme Court.
Supreme Court nominee.
Yeah.
So do you have any estimate on when we should hear about the extension of the CARES Act and the second stimulus check?
No. Honestly, I don't think there will be one, is my guess at this point. Yeah.
Okay. And can you tell us about unemployment benefits, how it applies, if it applies to churches, private schools, and things like that?
Yeah, so I think first it's important to back up and look at unemployment generally. Generally, on the employer side for unemployment, you have the option to pay state unemployment insurance tax, which is you pay it every month and you basically build up an account, or you can do the reimbursable method and just pay it as you go. So as an employer, what's interesting about churches, and that's really on the next slide there, we have the exception for churches, and churches are able to opt out of that if they choose to opt out of it. And a lot of churches do. We work with a lot of churches and private schools, and I think most nonprofits have opted out.
Why wouldn't you want to opt out, and why would you opt out?
Well, I think it's a financial thing largely. I mean, a lot of churches, just how they're structured financially, it's very difficult for them to pay in monthly because of the cost of it. And it's also difficult to do the reimbursable method because then you get hit with these large amounts pretty quickly. So it's just a function of, it's a practical side, I think, for most churches. I do know a couple of churches that are paying in unemployment, but most don't. So,
is there a penalty for not paying in? Because I would think nobody would want to pay if they don't have to.
There's not a penalty for paying in. It's just harder on your employees, right? I mean, it is a great benefit if you can offer to your employees. I encourage churches to look at it like any other benefit. Obviously, unemployment is a great thing if you lose your job to help you find another job. And churches really should be looking at it as from an overarching perspective, what's best for the church on the financial side. A lot of churches offer severance instead. That's what they end up doing because from a benevolent standpoint, they don't want to leave their employees with with nothing leading into the next job. So I encourage churches to even analyze how much severance they've paid out over the 3 years prior, for instance, and how much unemployment would cost, because eventually there is, it's a benefit. And I think as an employee often, and I encourage churches, obviously you want to give medical and those types of benefits before you start looking at unemployment. So it's really just looking at the overarching issues there. But I think most churches choose not to, and there is no penalty to not do it. So, yeah.
And going back to this pandemic and churches being closed, private schools being closed, if churches decided not to pay into it, what are their employees to do if they are laid off?
There are some options right now. And before I say that, I should have mentioned that earlier when we were talking about the exception, it also includes primary and secondary schools that are taught, or a religious purpose is their large reason for teaching and existing. So it also extends to private schools, that exception we were discussing. So how the CARES Act has changed unemployment for churches and nonprofits, Christian schools as well, is that now the federal government has said, at least for the time being, through December 31st, 2020, right now, unless there's an extension, that they can get unemployment. Even though those churches haven't been paying into it, they can apply for unemployment through the state. And we have lots of clients that have actually gotten unemployment through the state, or their employees have been able to get unemployment through the state over the last 4 months. So it has opened that up and allowed them to get that.
And are there limitations on the amount of time? You know, you can only get it for 3 weeks or something like that, or that's great.
There is no limitation except for just your general unemployment limitations, which have been extended right now during COVID as well. There's so much activity going on in this area because, as I'm sure everybody knows, the unemployment in California is reaching astronomical heights, and it's going to continue to grow with the continued shutdown and the continued issues that are happening within the state government. So fortunately, more, as we're seeing these tiers open up, and I know we're located in Riverside County. We went to Red yesterday, so everybody should go out and eat at a restaurant tomorrow or today. Are the restaurants open today?
Is it today?
I think restaurants are actually open today inside. I mean, it's a big deal around here. So, yeah, hopefully that helps with unemployment levels, but that's why they're seeing a reset. I've heard, and as I was researching, it is the unemployment system in California is just not been updated as far as technology, and they were looking at rolling that out, and that's actually what's been causing part of the backlog. Is as this historic levels of unemployment are happening, they're trying to make significant changes to the system, and that just as a business owner, as a small business owner, I know that doesn't work. I'm confused as to why the state of California thought it would work with the entire unemployment system, but that's what they tried. And now they're recommending that they stop rolling that out. So even in talking to people who are applying for unemployment, it's been interesting. There's different methods to apply, and it's changed a little bit. So it's an ever evolving area.
Okay. And there's, within the CARE Act, there's something called the Pandemic Unemployment Assistance Program. And can you tell us what that is and how that can be useful for churches and nonprofits?
So that is just the fancy name for the general unemployment through the federal government. So that's what the federal government originally did to extend it to churches and nonprofits, but also to include federal benefits with the state benefits. And, when the pandemic first started, working for a lot of churches, we were hearing our employees don't even want to come back because they're actually getting more money from.
Yeah, I've heard that.
Yeah,
especially
from the
with
federal
the
government.
$600 a week that it was. I mean, that sounds amazing.
Well, and even now, unemployment is based on how many hours. So think about it. If you're getting $140, let's say, because you were working 15 hours, because it works for part-time employees as well. All of a sudden, you're getting $900 from the 3 weeks in August. That's a rate. I mean, you just got a massive raise. So you're seeing some of that too, where people on the business owner side, whether it's a church or, even a law firm, doesn't matter really at that point. We're seeing a little bit of issues with all that because of that.
So wouldn't the employee who doesn't want to go back to work be disqualified from unemployment? Because I thought unemployment was a necessity that you can't get employment. So why would an employer certify that the employee couldn't work? Because I know many business owners were in this situation where their employees just didn't want to come back to work. Are they cut off from unemployment?
They should be, right? But the system is so broken that I don't even think the state realizes that that's what's happening. I had employers that when they were contacted, but that was 4 months later, and they would say, well, we offered their job back. But at that point, they've collected for 4 months and the employee doesn't care.
And so if the employer says we offered them their job back, would they be cut off?
Should be.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, that's how the system works. I've heard stories of that not happening within the pandemic because I think people that are even, running unemployment right now are just trying to give as much grace. I think that's how they see it, but
Yeah.
it's become an interesting quandary when you're a business owner or a church or a nonprofit and you have those types of issues.
Okay. And let's switch gears a little bit to the FMLA, the Family Medical Leave Act. How can that benefit church employees and nonprofit employees?
So that really gets more to sick leave, and that's it's an interesting. If you have fewer than 500 employees and the employees have worked for 30 days and they're taking leave due to a qualifying need because of the public health emergency, they can potentially apply for FMLA. And what's interesting about FMLA and the extended sick leave is that the federal government, through tax credits, will actually cover that extended sick leave. So, and churches are able to access that. So it's definitely something to talk to. If you have any questions, certainly you can call us about how it works on the practical side. But there are a lot of things on the internet that kind of walk through how it works.
And is this similar to the unemployment insurance, where generally churches didn't have access to it if they weren't paying into it, but now with the pandemic and through the CARES Act, now all of a sudden this is extended to nonprofits?
This is something that didn't exist prior to the pandemic. So typically it's something, FMLA is generally run just by the employers. FMLA, that's why we call it FMLA plus, because FMLA is something that exists all the time. But generally it exists to just give, whether you have to keep their job and not pay them. And, when people have emergencies and need to go out on family medical issues. For this, they're saying if an employer's and the standard is actually on the slide. I'm on the qualifications. The employee must be unable to work or telework due to a need for leave to care for the son or daughter under 18 years of age of such employee if the school or place of care has been closed, or if the child care provider of such son or daughter is unavailable due to a public health emergency. So really this is getting at, even if the school is closed or the daycare is closed and they have to stay home and care for an under 18 child, or, in the state of California, help with distance learning, because that's an issue for most parents, this can provide some help with that potentially.
Is this something that you would apply through the state, or do you have to go through the federal government?
This is through your employer, really. So you work through your employer to go out on sick leave. The employer would pay you, and then the employer would get the tax credit on the other side.
So the employer has to go and apply for that credit?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And where can the employers go, and even employees, to get more information?
There's websites on the SBA. The other thing with CARES Act is that there are loans to help employers if they're needed. And we're going to talk about that more next week, how that works as far as taking money from the federal government. And, I know a lot of nonprofits are nervous about that. And I think that's probably a good thing at points. But definitely the CARES Act has changed that a little bit. So you can apply for more information on the SBA website. Obviously, if you're talking about unemployment, the California unemployment website does help with that. But yeah, it's definitely a web, I would say, is the best way to say it, of kind of overarching things at this point. And if you have more questions after that, feel free to give us a call and we can answer those for you.
Yeah. Do we have any questions that have come in while we've been watching? Or if you still have questions, you can let us know. You can type them in now, or at any time contact us. This area is, as I mentioned, it's always changing, and a lot of it is new. It's new to nonprofits, to churches especially, that never really had to delve into this. And so we want to be here as a resource to help you and to provide continuous updates, because once you think you know what's going on, it changes. And especially we're expecting another change when, God willing, the Congress does come to an agreement and we can see that second CARES Act extension or stimulus package, because people are still out of employment, and nonprofits and businesses need some aid still. So we'll probably see changes in the near future, God willing.
One of the questions we've gotten is how, as on the employer side, how do you actually apply for the tax credit? And that's something that that's a CPA question. It's best to contact your CPA and work with them to figure out the best way to navigate that. And there are a lot of resources that have come out over the last couple months on the more technical side for employers to figure out how to do this moving forward. There's just so many aspects to this, and as it's changed, it's just hard for employers to navigate that as it keeps moving.
Yeah. Is it so unemployment? I understand it's kind of self-explanatory. You go through the process. It sounds like this tax credit is more complicated and might need some CPA and other professionals to help.
Yes.
Is it a lot of paperwork? What makes it so complicated?
It generally, on the unemployment side, it's going to be your normal paperwork. It's the FMLA and the tax credit that gets more complicated. The unemployment side, you're just going to get the documents from the state like you normally would. Right. And we do get that question a lot. How is it different now that churches, because they normally aren't dealing with unemployment, don't even know what that looks like because they don't normally deal with it. But what happens is when an employee applies for unemployment, they actually get contacted by the state just to confirm the information, certify, that's what you were talking about earlier, whether they truly lost their job, why they lost their job. Because some of these supplemental aid programs that we were talking about, the loss of the job, you have to certify it was because of COVID and because of the pandemic. And that's where a lot of the fraud is coming in, according to the state, people certifying that that's why they lost their job and really there was other reasons for it. Yeah. So I think the state is still working through how to deal with all that. But on the unemployment side, from the employer's perspective, it's a little bit easier because they sit back and wait to be contacted by EDD, right, which is the unemployment department in California, and they'll get the documents from the EDD and then be able to move forward. We have another question. How would a nonprofit deal with FMLAs? We don't pay taxes, so there'd be no tax credit. Yes, you don't pay taxes, but these taxes you do pay. So this is actually the Social Security side and the other things that you're paying into, even if you're not paying into Social Security. So I'd encourage you to talk to your CPA. I've dealt with that with a couple CPAs, and every church I know of has been able to get the tax credit. It's not associated with income tax. It's associated with the employment taxes that even nonprofits pay. So you are able to get that.
So do all nonprofits pay that tax?
All of them do.
Okay.
Yeah.
So they shouldn't have a problem with tapping into those resources.
No. And that's where really talk to your CPA, because it really can help if you have people going out on FMLA, and it definitely does work. When I first saw the tax credit, that was my first question too. And I'm looking into it more. It will apply for churches.
Do you have a CPA recommendation for churches, especially maybe locally in Riverside County, if they need to reach out for help?
We've really liked Nigro. They've been great. We have a couple ministries working with them, and I think they've done a great job. I don't know. There's a lot of great CPAs in Riverside County, but that's the one that we've worked with a lot of ministries in the past.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Great.
Let's see. Somebody's receiving unemployment charges for claims being filed by part-time or temporary employees who have not been laid off by us, but have been laid off by another employer. Can you speak to this? That shouldn't be happening. You should respond to the EDD and just say that employee hasn't been laid off by you. That normally happens when I think that's, again, flaws in the system. They're overly backlogged. Really, when they have two different jobs and they're part-time at two different places, I think that's where that happens. But it shouldn't be happening. You should only be charged unemployment for claims associated with people you actually laid off. So I would encourage you to contact EDD and try to get those reversed off of your charges.
Contacting EDD sounds easier.
It's hard. Yeah. And it may be that, you need to contact your attorney even, and have them write a letter and say, hey, these charges need to be removed. I guess that depends on how significant the charges were and how long they ran for. But
so with this backlog and the reset, is EDD still operating and open, or are they completely... It'll be interesting to see if, can an employer even contact them, or are they just saying, no, we're not accepting anything right now, go away?
I think they are at least accepting phone calls because they're
Okay.
accepting names of people and then calling them back to do claims. But yeah, it's a good question. I definitely think the customer service level will probably decline over the next 2 weeks as they're trying to figure out what they're doing.
Yeah. And I wonder if someone from the EDD, never mind, it gets all kinds of complicated.
Yeah, it definitely, and that's, Newsom obviously is getting a ton of heat, and I think probably appropriately because of everything that's going on. But we'll see what happens over the next 2 weeks and if they can fix it. I mean, January is a long time. If you're unemployed and you don't have, I mean, the state, it's just an interesting position that the state's in. They're the ones shutting down the economy. They're driving the unemployment up. And then they're telling people you can't even submit claims. And claims that have been submitted for months are backlogged. 1.6 million claims. That means that that means that those people aren't getting their money yet,
so
which is
tragic. You can't work and you can't file for unemployment.
Yep.
And good luck.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting place we're in this area.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you for your time today, everybody. I think we've answered the questions we've gotten so far, but if you have more questions, this is such a technical area, especially with FMLA. Mm-hmm. We field FMLA questions daily from churches and private schools because it's so hard to generalize how it will apply in every single specific situation. So this was kind of a just an overview, but if you have specific questions, I encourage you to call and reach out, and we're happy to answer those.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to next week when we talk about some of the religious freedom aspects and if there's any strings attached to churches and nonprofits accepting this money. So we look forward to seeing you then, and thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you.